and I didn't want to go up there because I had no idea it was for me.
I had a camera up there, up on the rock, and she's like, this someone is so sweet, and I was like, this is for you, and she had no idea what was going on. I gave her a plaque that I read to her, and then asked her to marry me, so.
And so we went ahead and went up there, and I had no idea he was going to propose to me until he actually pulled out a ring and got down on his knees. He had a beautiful plaque, and he read it, and we cried, and it was beautiful. Totally shocked me.
Isn't that interesting how as you watch the video, and didn't we look so happy and so thrilled about being in love and marriage? And again, maybe many of you remember that same kind of feeling early on in your engagement, early on into your marriage. One of my favorite illustrations of what happens early on in a marriage is this. Usually I think that when we first start off in a relationship, we really develop this. I believe that we start off with what I call, we notice each other through a positive lens. It's really looking at each other through rose-colored glasses. I remember so much in my relationship early on with Erin, my wife, when we started off, how we just saw each other with this lens, that everything that we did, we interpreted and we saw each other through this lens. When I was moving from Phoenix, Arizona to Denver, Colorado for my master's degree, I asked Erin, we were engaged at the time, I said, hey, why don't you come with me? And we'll have a great road trip out of it. You can help me move in, kind of see Denver. We'll be living our first year married. And so I talked her into driving with me. And so that the day arrived where we loaded up the U-Haul, we loaded the trailer that we were going to tow my car on back. We got ready. We said goodbyes to my parents. Got in and we started taking off. Man, we were excited. All of a sudden I look in my side mirror and I can see my dad running behind the truck. And I'm thinking, what are you doing? You know, Dad, let me go. It's okay. You know, it's time to let me leave the nest, kind of a thing. And Erin, you know, is looking at me like, what is wrong? I'm saying, Dad's running behind the truck. And she said, I'll pull over. I'm sure he wants to give you one final hug. So I'm thinking, oh, geez. So I pull over, and so I'm expecting, you know, Dad to run up to me and say some last, you know, encouraging word. And so he runs up and says, you knucklehead. I'm thinking, what in the world? He goes, don't you see what you've left back there? I really looked in the mirror, and my car was still sitting in front of our house. When I jerked the truck to leave, I must have not hooked up the car right, and the thing pulled off the truck. I mean, I would have driven to Colorado, never even would have noticed I left my car there. So it took us about an hour to re-bend some things that had bent, and when we started to leave again, Erin and I were laughing at each other, and she was thinking how cute that was, that I wasn't that responsible to check something like that. Again, she was looking at me through this lens. It was all so funny and positive. We continued to drive. Halfway through, she said to me, hey, by the way, you know, what routes are we going to take? I don't know. It's north. You know, Phoenix, Denver, it's north. I mean, wherever. Signs will tell us. She's looking at me like, what kind of crazy person, you know, drives and doesn't even look at a map? But she thought it was so funny how I wouldn't even do that. Again, looking at me through this positive lens. Towards the end of the day, I'm so exhausted that I say, Erin, you've got to drive this truck. I mean, I'm so worn out. And she goes, yeah, right. I'm not touching this truck. I hadn't even thought to ask if my, you know, fiance would feel comfortable doing that. But again, it didn't bother me because I thought that was cute, that made her afraid. I saw her through this lens. Erin's a labor and delivery nurse, and so she has a nurse background, and so she says, you know what, you got to pull over, and I'll get you some things to take that'll keep you awake. I'm thinking, great. So she loads me up with vitamin B12, caffeine pills, no-dose, Jolt Cola. I mean, if it had caffeine in it, she gave it to me. I mean, I was so wired that as we were driving, I'm shaking. I mean, it was like I was on speed or something. I mean, I'm so wired to go. I'm like, let's drive to Canada. I mean, let's go all the way. I mean, we laughed. I mean, I thought that was so funny that my wife, or soon-to-be wife, wouldn't even check to see if I could take all these things, like to make sure that they wouldn't produce a heart attack or something. It was great, though. Everything was so positive. About 2 in the morning, we arrive in Colorado Springs. I mean, I am just dead to the world. I said, Erin, we have to stop here. I mean, we can't make it. Of course, we didn't plan to head for this. I didn't check to see if, let's say the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs was having Parents' Weekend. Of course, they were. So we felt like Mary and Joseph driving into Bethlehem. You know, there was not an inn in that city. I mean, it was hilarious. We drove around for about an hour looking for a place, and finally some guy said, oh, yeah, I know where the perfect place is. I guarantee they'll have a room because you pay by the hour. neither one of us even really got what that meant. And so we go downtown to where this is seedy little motel, and the thing was kind of shaped in a horseshoe with the office in the middle. So I am exhausted. So I pull the big truck all the way around and stop and go in. Sure enough, I go in and say, "Hey, buddy, we need a room." The guy said, "Okay, how long do you want it for?" "I don't know, all night." He's like high-fiving me, going, "Buddy," and I'm thinking, what is he talking about? I had no idea. So I get us a room. They only had one room left, and so we had to share a room. So then now we're nervous, thinking, what are our parents going to think? I mean, they don't, here we have to share a room. Are they going to think, we're not doing something we're supposed to? So we said, well, we'll just call them from the room. We get in the room, and what do you know? Phone doesn't work. So we spend the night, get up the next morning. I go in to check out, and I walk into the manager, and he's irritated about something. I said, "Buddy, what's wrong?" I've had the worst morning. Everybody's yelling at me because none of the phones work." Yeah, no kidding. You got me in trouble. So I, paid the bill, and I go to get Erin loves Diet Coke. So I go to get her a Diet Coke outside, and I see a cable lying on the ground. I'm like, whoa. I see another one, and I see another one. So I start following these things, and I follow all these cables lying on the ground, except there's one more stretched across the air right about 3 inches from the top of my truck. We had taken out all of the phone cords when I pulled into there. So the moment that sinks in, I run into the room where Erin's at. I'm like, "Load up! We got to get going now. We got to leave." I mean, she doesn't know what's going on. She thinks, I've robbed the place. You talk about an expensive room. When I had to pay for that damage as well, I mean, that room cost me about as much money as I've ever spent for a week of vacation. But I'll tell you what, is that as we drove to the rest of the way, we laughed nonstop because we saw each other through this positive lens. Everything was so funny and hilarious, and that's usually what happens early on in our relationship. We usually see each other through rose-colored glasses. However, imagine this, all right? Imagine that there's a lot of conflict takes over in the relationship, a lot of negativity, a lot of arguing over time. Usually what happens is a couple will switch this lens and will go to more of this lens. Usually negative thinking takes over when a lot of conflict in things happens. Once this happens, we begin to see each other not through that rosy-colored lenses, but more through this. We start to see each other as being very negative. That's what can happen. Imagine that you go through that same trip that Erin and I went through. Do you think it would have been so funny and so positive had we seen each other with this lens? No way. When I forgot to hook the trailer up, that would have been evidence of how irresponsible I was and how dangerous I could become. When I didn't look at a map to see what roads we were, that would have been more evidence that I was dangerous and irresponsible, and what kind of knucklehead would do that? Do you think if I saw Erin through this lens, do you think I would have thought it was so funny and cute that she didn't think all that caffeine could have produced a cardiac arrest? No way. That would have been evidence of how negative she is and how negative I think she is. When I, knocked all the phone cords off, again, that would have been more evidence of how negative I am. That's what can happen in relationships. Negative thinking is really, how I define that is when one mate constantly sees the motives of the other mate as being more negative than is really the case. It's almost like they're seeing that they believe, when they're seeing this, that they believe that one mate or child, a co-worker, is trying to ruin the relationship on purpose. Again, you might be sitting there saying, that's great. I've seen people with negative beliefs. I myself have had negative beliefs. So what? What is really the big deal of this? It is a big deal, and let me tell you why. What happens over time when you have negative beliefs, we start to develop what's called confirmation bias. Again, it's a nice little psych term. Really what it means is this. Whatever confirmation bias is, whatever we think, positive or negative, we will find evidence to support our belief. If we have this kind of thinking, we will notice the positive thing that our mate does, that our loved ones do. We will find the evidence We will see what they do that's positive. On the other hand, if this is our thinking, we will find evidence, we will notice all the negative things that they do to support our belief. Isn't that interesting? Let me give you a quick example. In your own relationship, think of when you were growing up. Did you guys ever have a favorite car that you just had to have? Your life and happiness depended upon it, upon you having this? When I was younger, I had to have a Datsun Z240. Oh, I had to have that car. I remember the day that I decided that was the car that I had to have, something really interesting happened. They were everywhere. It was like the whole world. It was like everybody in Phoenix was driving one of these cars.